Starting on the 24th of January, we're going to be having one full week of close quarters combat. That's right, Clan Brawls is back, and this time at tier 5. Since there's such a variety of choice at this tier, we're going to be looking at some good picks that should perform rather well. Diving straight in, we'll start this video off by looking at destroyers. If the previous brawls are anything to go by, some of the key attributes you're going to be looking for in a destroyer is a high top speed and a high alpha strike. This is mainly for rushing and dumping torps, although means of knocking out opposing destroyers will also be rather valuable too. We'll get the obvious ones out of the way first, and those are going to be removed ships. The Kamikaze Twins and Fujin are very strong choices and are going to completely stomp in this game mode, so if you are lucky enough to have one of these in your port, you probably don't need me to tell you why it's a good pick. If however you are coming against one of these, then it will certainly be in your best interest to make it a priority to knock them out, because they are incredibly strong ships. If, like many people, you don't have one of those in your port, there is a tech tree equivalent, Minakaze. Again, this will be a common pick, as quite frankly it's just a great boat. Minakaze will be very viable for brawls due to some of its overwhelmingly good features. It's fast in more ways than one, the first being a top speed of 39 knots, and you've got a speed boost, which is going to be great for rushing your opponents, but even better is the fast torpedo reload. Without the commander skill, your launches will be ready in just 42 seconds after the battle starts, and as you've got 3 double launches with a 7km range, and if you space them out, you can launch a set every 14 seconds. You're going to be putting your enemies through hell. Of course, with such good torpedoes, the guns do suffer, and a 10-second reload and god-awful traverse speed, it's best to avoid gunfights at all costs, as you will most likely lose. But overall, it's a great boat in and out of brawls, so it should be rather fun to play. In previous brawls, we also saw quite a lot of French destroyers, and there is a reason for that. Quick. Our next pick is the French Jaguar. The base speed is nothing too special at 35.5 knots, but with the speed flag and the 20% bonus of the engine boost, you're going to be sitting at just over 44 knots. Anyone who's done the maths will have worked out that it's only marginally faster than Minakaze under the same conditions, but the reason why Jaguar would be a good choice is the torpedoes. You have the same amount, but they are much faster, and do almost 50% more damage. This is important because if you are rushing a ship and getting close enough to shout insults at each other, you'll probably want to ensure that your torpedo strike will knock them out. Plus, there's another advantage over Minakaze, which is they've got a longer range of 8 kilometers, since you can also stealth torp, and they'll reach their target much faster because their torpedoes are very quick. As for the guns, you don't benefit from a main battery reload booster like at higher tiers, and they are on the slow side. However, with 130mm guns, you're still sufficiently armed to deal damage in both an offensive and defensive manner, and with those points in mind, that's why Jaguar's been listed. Now, next up we've got the Jack of all trades T22. This one should perform well in almost any situation because of its healthy array of consumables and generally good stats. The gun caliber is on the lower end at 105mm, however they do boast a 4-second reload, giving it a healthy 72,000 high explosive DPM. As well as this, the torpedoes aren't too bad either. They've got a 7.5km range with decent damage, and the reload isn't too harsh at 68 seconds, so those characteristics alone mean it shouldn't do too badly. What really makes it good is that it's got access to both smoke and a hydro. This means it can be used in both an offensive and defensive manner. When you're dueling other destroyers, especially torpedo boats, the hydro is going to give you the advantage of seeing the torpedoes much earlier, and that'll sort of give you the upper hand as you can more concentrate on firing on your opponents. Whilst defensively, you can sit in your smoke and use the 4km of ship detection to attack ships, pushing you in relative safety. Of course, if they do actually get into your smoke, they are still going to see you, but it does give you a bit of a heads up and you can maybe launch some torpedoes at them. But whether it be guns or torpedoes, depending on the target, for all of those reasons above, T22 is a solid choice. Finally, we have got Nicholas. Initially, I was actually considering Hell, as that's the premium tier 5 American, but overall, Nicholas looks like it'd be the better pick. Because Hell has got an extra gun, it does boast a higher HE DPM of 112,000, but that lead is very small, especially when you consider the payoff for that extra gun is 700 meters worse detection. That lower detection is rather advantageous since Nicholas can send off a flurry of 12 torpedoes, but that is at a cost of having a range of 5.5 kilometers. This means you need to get in close to launch these, so the closer you can get in without being detected, the better, and therefore Nicholas should be the better choice of the two. As for getting to your targets, that's going to be rather easy too. With a base speed of 37 knots, with the speed flag and running the engine boost, you can reach up to 42 knots, which is rather quick. But apart from that, you have also got an American smokescreen, so you can also provide your teammates with a long-lasting cover. So overall, again, that's why I think Nicholas is also going to be a decent pick for this brawl. Now, before we move on to the cruisers, if there are any ships that I haven't covered, or you just wanted to share what you're going to be trying out in these brawls, then let me know in the comments below. To start off with the cruisers, we're going to begin with Furitaka. This should be a very strong choice for brawls, as apart from a heal, it's got everything you could want from a cruiser. Although you're not that well armoured, with 203mm guns, you are perfectly equipped to deal with all three classes. The armour piercing can sufficiently overmatch the barrels of a good portion of the cruisers you'll face and deal a fat chunk of damage, except for some of the icebreakers on say Emerald, Hawkins or Königsberg, where you're just going to have to aim a little bit higher. And that same armour piercing is also strong enough to penetrate battleships at some angles too. However, if you are finding you're not doing too much damage or you're just not having that much luck, your high explosive can be just as lethal. You've got a great fire chance, and a decent number of hits will guarantee you'll probably wipe out a large chunk of a destroyer's HP, or if you are using it on cruisers or battleships, you're going to be incapacitating quite a few modules and burning them down with relative ease. Moving on to torpedoes, you've got decent firing angles too, and with a range of 10 kilometers dealing over 16,000 per torpedo, they are brutal. During the initial stages of a brawl, it may be a good idea to throw them down choke points where ships are likely to emerge from. This is because you may then get a lucky hit. And then when you do get further into the games, those good firing angles will also be pretty good at knocking out opponents when you're at much closer ranges. Finally, it's a rather nimble vessel too. With a 34.5 knot top speed and a sub 6 second rudder shift time, it'll also be relatively easy to avoid torpedoes, and this is further aided from the fact that you've got a hydroacoustic search. Overall, it's a solid cruiser both in and out of brawls, so you should have some real success in it. Next up, we have got Exeter. Many of the points we just discussed on Furitaka also apply to this, as the ships do have quite a few similarities. The one key difference between the two is that Exeter comes equipped with a heal. This will come in very useful and is worth some of the lesser stats in other areas of the ship. On Exeter, the guns are the same calibre, so everything we just covered earlier applies here too. However, the shells do a little bit less damage, probably due to them having less mass, and have a slightly lower fire chance, but should still do an adequate job. The torpedoes are a little bit worse than Furitaka's, as you do lose 2 kilometers of range, but even then, 8 kilometers is more than enough. And along with similar damage, they are still going to be very effective. And one thing to keep in mind is 8 kilometer range torpedoes is better than probably quite a few of the destroyers at tier 5, so they still are very good. Now, in terms of speed, that's pretty good too. It's not as quick, but with 32 knots and a slightly elevated rudder shift time of 8.4 seconds, it's still by no means sluggish. Exeter also comes with a decent amount of consumables. You've got a decent hydro, which you'll certainly need, as well as a fighter, damage control and a heal. The fighter will come in very useful too. This is because if you're unsure where an enemy is, let's say they're hiding behind an island, or you just want an updated position, you can pop the fighter and there's a good chance you're going to be able to see where they are and where they're going. With this, you can completely eliminate any element of surprise and give your team the upper hand. Again, the armour is very light. You are primarily covered in 30mm of plating, so having that heal will come in very useful. Now, the heal isn't something that's unique to Exeter, as if you wanted a tech tree equivalent, you've also got Hawkins, and that comes equipped with a heal and a hydro. I've got to say, this wouldn't be a bad pick either, since although the guns are a slightly lower calibre, Hawkins does boast a higher DPM, whilst also having significantly thicker armour, including an icebreaker bow. If you do have both of these and aren't sure what you'd enjoy the most, then maybe just try both of them out and see what you perform best in. Whilst on the topic of DPM, that moves us onto our last cruiser, Königsberg. Although it doesn't boast high caliber guns, it does boast a high rate of fire, which translates to a high DPM. While this will mean that most of your shells are going to be shattering on thick armour, if you can find a good spot to penetrate, or you're just shooting at lightly armoured targets, then you're going to be able to really wear them down. In terms of armour, front on it's actually really quite good. The citadel behind your bow is covered by a 20mm icebreaker, so any overmatch would need to be plunging fire to score a citadel hit, but since this is Brawls, there's a very low chance that people are going to be at such a range where they're going to be getting plunging fire. So that's brilliant news, since on both sides of your ship, you've got 6 torpedoes. With that, you can charge your opponents and just wipe them out, which is further benefited by a 32.5 knot top speed. Of course, from the side, you are very easy to knock out, so before you do turn to launch your torpedoes, ensure that your opponent has just fired, otherwise you're probably going to be finding yourself being sent back to port very quickly. In terms of consumables, it gets even better. You're also very well equipped to deal with destroys because you've got a Hydro with a 5.5 kilometer ship detection range. This means you can easily flush out smokes while utilising your high DPM, or you can even keep someone behind an island and just keep them spotted with that Hydro and prevent them from pushing out. Whilst talking about islands, you've also got a fighter which, as previously mentioned, this will be great for spotting opponents over islands, but this will be for a short period of time since there's going to be a good chance that those planes are going to be shot down. Now, with the cruisers covered, we're going to move on to the class which puts the Brawl into brawls. Next, we're going to be looking at battleships. We'll start this off by looking at the ship born for this game mode. If you haven't already guessed, it's Agincourt. This steel beast is bristling with guns, armed with 14 305mm main batteries and an innumerable number of secondary batteries. This is the one ship you do not want to get close to in brawls, and that's what makes Agincourt perfectly suited for the game mode, because that's exactly what people will have to do. I've already made a number of videos covering this ship, but as a quick overview, it's a slow machine, but once in position, it's very hard to uproot. And with the main weakness of the ship being a complete lack of anti-air, with no carriers to face, this is where Agincourt will shine. Both destroyers and cruisers will be rapidly worn down by the 152mm secondaries, whilst versing any battleships shouldn't be too difficult either, as at close range, I've got to say a 14-gun volley of armour piercing should quickly shut them down. Of course, with such a low speed, if a destroyer does manage to rush you, there's a good chance you're out of the game, as apart from the tight turning circle, your 22 knots won't get you out of the way quick enough to dodge all torpedoes, so you must ensure that you focus enemy destroyers as soon as you see them. Really, that advice should be taken with really whatever you're sailing in, but especially when you're in Agincourt. Since Agincourt is a premium, the tech tree equivalent would be Iron Duke. Although her secondary armament is dwarfed in comparison, the main batteries are better in terms of caliber and rate and fire. Plus, at close range, the armour piercing should devastate your opponent, so even if you have got Agincourt, it may even be worth giving Iron Duke a spin too. One thing to keep in mind with Iron Duke is the turret traverse is awful, so grease the gears alongside pre-positioning your turrets would be advised so you don't get caught out. Next up, it's probably no surprise that Giulio Cesare has made it onto the list. Now a removed ship, it's effectively a tier 5 Andrea Doria, which should perform rather well in brawls. It's well armoured, which you're going to need if you're, well, brawling, and it can quickly get into position with its high 27 knot top speed, only beaten by Congo's 30. It's got a relatively fast rudder shift time, and alongside the good turret traverse, all of these things are going to be what you'll need to outmaneuver your opponent and perform drive-bys. What makes things even better is some of the drawbacks of the ship won't really affect it in brawls. For instance, it does have a somewhat low firing range, but since most of your engagements won't be at range anyway, that shouldn't be an issue. Now, you do also have a lower than average health pool, and alongside that your torpedo protection isn't as high as others, but if you utilise your outstanding manoeuvrability to dodge torpedoes and angle shots, you shouldn't really have too much of a problem. Now, since this is no longer available to purchase, there is the tier 5 tech tree equivalent, which is Cavour. If you are playing around Christmas time, then there's a good chance that you got it for free during the New Year's night event. However, I'm going to be honest, it probably won't play as well as Giulio. Moving on from Giulio, last on the list is Peter Wielki. This will probably come as no surprise since the bow armour is insanely thick. The bottom half sits at 125mm and 75 above that. Bow in, you are not getting overmatched. Apart from the bow, the ship is really well armoured, so these brawls, the only thing that you're really going to need to make sure of is that the enemy battleship can't get on your side. I mean, of course, if you're getting rushed by a destroyer or something, that's also going to be very bad, but in terms of going against other battleships, really, you're pretty much safe as long as you can keep your nose in towards them. Aside from the armour, you also benefit from huge 356mm guns. These will be able to smack other ships whilst also benefiting from pretty decent accuracy at close range. There are other options like New York or Congo, but one of those suffers from low speed and the other one suffers from thin armour. This is sort of the best of both worlds because you've got armour, guns, and surprisingly, you also have speed. You'd think something that's this well armoured would suffer with speed, but that's not quite the case. You're actually able to reach a surprising 26.5 knots, and you've got a fast 11.5 second rudder shift, so you're actually quite well equipped to move out the way or just keep your nose towards someone. So if you're getting rushed by, say, a destroyer, you're actually going to be kind of manoeuvrable and may be able to take less torpedoes. So Peter Veliki is sort of got a bit of everything, so it should be a really easy ship to play and not give you too many troubles. But with the last ship covered, all that's left for you to do is hop in some tier 5 games and see what you enjoy the most before the brawls begin. Now, if you wanted to see how a brawling ship performs, then maybe check out one of my Agincourt videos on screen now.